On his final day before losing everything, a broke barber in Texas offered one last act of kindness to a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. Friday morning broke over San Antonio with a heavy, colorless sky, one of those mornings where even the sunlight seemed too tired to show up. Along South Flores Street, metal shutters groaned as businesses opened for another day. But inside Rivera's barbershop, a place that once buzzed with voices and laughter, silence pressed against the walls like an unwelcome guest. Mark Rivera, 54 years old and worn down far beyond his age, rolled up the shop's faded blue gate. His hands trembled, not from the cool breeze drifting in from the street, but from the weight of a truth he could no longer escape. This was Friday, the second to last day he would ever open his family's barbershop. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., if he didn't hand over $9,500 in back rent, the building's new owner would reclaim everything. The Rivera named 3 generations of barbers, 3 generations of dignity, would end there on that cracked linoleum floor. Inside, the place still smelled like warm shaving cream and aftershave, a scent that had once been home. 3 red vintage barber chairs stood like old soldiers, scratched, tired, loyal. They had belonged to Mark's father, and before that to his grandfather who opened the shop in 1955. Now their chrome was dull, the leather fading, just like the man who stood before them. Mark caught his reflection in the long mirror. Graying temples, lines carved deep across his forehead, eyes that once sparkled with pride now dimmed by a year of loss. The collapse had been slow and merciless. Cheap franchise barbershops, stealing customers, rising rent, long empty days with no one walking through the door. Then came the blow that broke him. Patricia, his wife of 23 years, left with their 2 children, Daniel and Sophie. She'd told him she was tired of waiting for the life he could never give. She wanted more, bigger house, better schools, a future he couldn't compete with. Mark had replayed that moment for months, wondering what he could have done differently, wondering if he'd ever hear his children say Dad with love again. By 9 a.m., the street outside hummed awake, but Rivera's barbershop stayed quiet. A single chair creaked as Mark sat down, staring at the door like a man waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come. He checked his wallet. $80. Enough for groceries, maybe bus fare, not enough for salvation. Still, he swept the floor, adjusted the combs. A man can lose everything, but not his discipline, not his dignity. Across the street, shopkeepers greeted each other. Cars rolled by. Life moved on without him. But if someone had been watching closely, they might have noticed something different about the air that Friday morning. A stillness, a tension, as though the day itself was holding its breath. Because in less than 24 hours, the King of Kings would walk through Mark Rivera's door disguised as a man the world had forgotten. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Morning hours at Rivera's barbershop used to be the busiest. Truck drivers stopping in before long hauls, office workers grabbing quick trims, retirees coming just to talk. But on this Friday, the shop sat hollow and unmoving, as if time itself had stalled inside its walls. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead. Outside, people walked past the windows without even glancing in. Mark Rivera moved through the shop with a kind of automatic dignity, the way a man behaves when he's trying to keep himself from falling apart. He arranged the clipper guards, wiped down mirrors already clean, straightened bottles that hadn't been touched in weeks. Anything to keep his hands busy. Anything to keep his mind from wandering back to what he'd lost. On the leather armrest of the middle chair, a faded scratch caught the light. Mark paused, running his thumb over it. His father had made that scratch decades earlier while cutting a veteran's hair. Mark could still remember the way his dad laughed it off. Said even chairs need scars to prove they lived. But those memories now felt like they belonged to a life that wasn't his anymore. The door jingled once around 9:30 a.m. Not a customer, just the mailman dropping off a stack of bills. Mark already knew he couldn't pay. The man gave him that sympathetic nod people offer when they see someone drowning but have no idea how to save them. By noon, Mark sat alone in his father's old chair, elbows resting on his knees. The shop was too quiet, too still. Silence used to be peaceful. Now it felt like a verdict. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 12 slow chimes. Daniel and Sophie would be in school right now. They hadn't heard his voice in nearly a year. Patricia had made sure of that. He replayed their last argument endlessly, her voice sharp with frustration, his voice cracking under the weight of failure. The kids standing in the hallway, confused, scared, watching their world split apart. Then the slammed door. Then the silence. Then nothing. Mark pulled out his phone. The same unanswered text messages lit up the screen, months of them. "Happy birthday, son. I'm proud of you. Can we talk?" Left unread. Most not even delivered. Patricia had blocked his number long ago. The walls of the barbershop seemed to close in. His chest felt tight. A barber learns to hide emotion. Clients trust steady hands, not trembling ones. But today, on the edge of everything, even breathing felt heavy. He stood, walked to the back where the old radio sat. It hadn't worked right since his father passed. Out of habit, he clicked it on. Static. A faint country song drifted through the noise. His dad's favorite. For a moment, the ache in Mark's throat was too much to swallow. He closed his eyes. Not a rehearsed prayer, not a church prayer, just a raw whisper from a man standing at the end of himself. "God, I don't even know if you still hear me. I've messed up more than I can fix. I've lost my family. I'm losing this shop. I'm losing everything." His voice broke. "But if you're real, if you're still somewhere out there, please, I need help. I can't carry this anymore." No light split the ceiling. No heavenly voice answered. Only the lonely hum of fluorescent bulbs and the soft rattle of the air vent. But heaven had already heard him. And before the day ended, the answer to that prayer would walk through his door wearing rags, smelling of the streets, and carrying the presence of someone far greater than Mark could imagine. By late afternoon, shadows stretched long across the floor of Rivera's barbershop. The clock above the mirror read 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes before closing. Mark wiped down the last chair, already rehearsing the painful routine of locking up for what could be one of the final times in his life. Outside, the Texas sky dimmed into a muted orange. Cars drifted past slowly. The world seemed to move in soft motion, almost as if the day itself was holding its breath. Then the bell above the door chimed. It wasn't the gentle ring of a regular customer. It was abrupt, sharp like the sound of something unexpected cutting through a man's final moment of quiet. Mark looked up. A stranger stood in the doorway, and the smell of the streets entered with him. The man's hair hung in long, tangled ropes nearly to his elbows, dusty, matted, and stiff from months without washing. His beard was thick, uneven, burdened with dried leaves and street debris. His clothes were little more than fabric, clinging to him, an oversized brown shirt, stained with grease, torn jeans, shoes so worn the soles folded inward. Two young professionals, both wearing pressed shirts and business badges, were waiting on the bench for their cuts. The moment the stranger walked in, they immediately stiffened. One exchanged a glance with the other, eyes full of disdain. Maybe we should come back tomorrow," one muttered under his breath. But it wasn't a whisper. It was loud enough that the homeless man heard every word. They stood, grabbed their bags, and brushed past him as if he was contagious. The door slammed behind them, leaving only the stranger and the barber in a heavy, awkward vacuum of silence. The homeless man didn't flinch, his eyes unexpectedly clear, unusually calm, lifted to Mark's. "Sir," he said softly, his voice hoarse from cold nights. I know I probably don't belong in a place like this, but could you cut my hair?" Mark swallowed hard. He could almost hear the echo of the rent collector's voice in his mind. "You need every dollar you can get. Tomorrow this shop is gone." But before he could respond, the stranger continued, "I've got a job interview tomorrow morning. My last shot, his voice broke. "I don't have a dollar to my name, but if I get the job, I swear, sir, I'll pay you back. I need to look human again." The shop went still. Mark looked at the filthy shirt, the tangled hair, the defeated shoulders. He saw a man standing exactly where he himself had been for months, on the very edge of giving up. Something in those eyes, deep brown, oddly peaceful, pulled Mark toward a decision no struggling business owner should make. But good men don't choose based on profit. They choose based on compassion. "Come on in," Mark finally said, voice unexpectedly gentle. "Sit down. I'll take care of you." The man inhaled shakily, like someone who had forgotten what kindness felt like. He stepped toward the middle chair, moved slowly, deliberately, almost reverently, as though he knew, and heaven knew, that this moment would change everything. And the King of Kings, wrapped in rags, took his seat. The stranger sank slowly into the center barber chair, the oldest one, the one Mark's father once called the heart of the shop. The vinyl creaked under the man's weight, and for a brief second, Mark wondered if the chair, like everything else in his life, might break before the night was over. Up close, the reality hit harder. The man's hair wasn't just long, it was a battlefield. Knotted, matted, heavy with months of dirt, wind, and sleeping on concrete. The beard? Worse. A thick, tangled web that hid most of his face. And the smell. Anyone else would have kicked him out instantly. But Mark didn't step back. He didn't wrinkle his nose. He didn't lecture him. Instead, he draped the cape gently over the man's shoulders placing dignity back onto someone who'd forgotten what it felt like. The stranger closed his eyes. It was the smallest gesture, but it said everything. For the first time in a long time, he felt safe. Mark led him to the washing station first. His fingers hesitated above the bottles. He had 2 shampoos, the cheap industrial one and the premium eucalyptus-infused formula he reserved for special clients willing to pay extra. Clients he no longer had. He didn't even think twice. He grabbed the expensive one and emptied half the bottle onto the man's hair. Warm water ran dark brown, nearly black, with months of street life washing away. The stranger let out a sound that wasn't quite a cry, not quite a sigh. Something raw, from a place far deeper than exhaustion. "How long have you been out there?" Mark asked quietly. 8 months, the man whispered. "I was an accountant. 30 years. And then one day, downsized. Wife left. Lost the apartment. Lost myself." His voice cracked. "Tomorrow's the first interview I've been given since." Mark said nothing, but his hands were steady, careful, almost fatherly, as he rinsed and massaged the scalp. It took 3 washes before the water ran clear. Then the real work began. Back at the chair, Mark picked up his wide-toothed comb. Even with patience, the comb caught every 2 inches. Snag after snag, knot after knot. Most barbers would have given up or shaved it all off. But Mark worked with the precision of a man preserving something sacred. Minutes turned into nearly an hour of detangling, trimming, shaping. Clumps of hair fell in soft thuds to the floor, so much that it formed a small hill around the chair. He followed with the beard steam towel, hot foam, the sharp razor he'd sharpened earlier that morning out of habit, not knowing a miracle would need it. Stroke by stroke, layer by layer, the man's face emerged from beneath months of abandonment. Underneath the roughness, under the weariness, there was a gentleness, a quiet nobility that startled Mark. Finally, he added the finishing touches. A little pomade, a careful side part, a subtle spray of aftershave. When he spun the chair toward the mirror, the stranger gasped. His hand trembled as he touched his clean jawline, his newly revealed features. I look like myself again," he whispered. Then tears streamed down his face. "I don't know how to repay you." Mark swallowed. He had lost 2 paying customers. He had used his most expensive products. He had spent precious time on a haircut he'd never get paid for. Yet his voice came out soft, filled with something deeper than logic. "Just go to your interview tomorrow," he said. "That's all the payment I need." The stranger rose, placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, and held it there with an intensity that sent a chill through the room. "Sir," he said quietly, "you just gave more than a free haircut tonight." And though Mark didn't know it yet, he had just served Jesus Christ himself. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The freshly groomed stranger remained seated, staring at his reflection as if he were looking at a ghost, someone he'd lost years ago and never thought he'd see again. His eyes shimmered. Then the tears came. Not the quiet kind a person wipes away quickly. These were deep, uncontrollable sobs, the kind that seized his shoulders and shook the entire chair. Tears carved clean lines down his newly shaven face. He pressed both palms over his mouth as if trying to keep from falling apart completely. Mark froze. He'd seen grown men cry in this chair before, after funerals, after divorces, after bad diagnoses, but never like this. "It's okay," Mark said softly. "Let it out." The stranger nodded, though he looked embarrassed, like a man who hadn't been given permission to be fragile in a very long time. Through broken breaths, he finally whispered, No one has treated me like a human being in months." Mark placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You deserve dignity like anyone else." The stranger looked up sharply, eyes glistening with something beyond gratitude, something deeper, older, heavier. "You have no idea," he said, voice trembling, What you just did for me." His tone changed, then subtle at first, but unmistakable. The softness remained, but there was a new resonance underneath it, a firmness, an authority that did not match a homeless man sitting in a thrift store shirt. He stood slowly, still trembling, then faced Mark fully. "Why did you help me?" the stranger asked. Mark hesitated. He felt the weight of the question, but he didn't have a rehearsed answer. No logic, no business explanation, just truth. "Because someone needed help," he said, "and I know what it feels like to have no one." The stranger inhaled deeply. His tears quieted. The sadness in his eyes didn't vanish, but something behind them awakened, like a light shining through a long-buried window. He stepped closer to Mark and spoke in a voice that suddenly felt too steady, too powerful to belong to someone the world had forgotten. "Mark Rivera." Mark's heart slammed in his chest. He had never told the man his name. How do you know who I am?" The stranger didn't answer the question. Instead, he placed both hands around Mark's rough, calloused ones. His palms were warm, unusually warm. "God saw every moment of compassion you've shown," he said, "even the ones no one else noticed." Mark blinked hard. "What are you talking about?" The stranger's gaze softened with a profound sorrow, almost like he carried the grief of the entire world. "You've been walking through darkness," he said quietly. "Loss, shame, emptiness. But tomorrow," he paused. The room seemed to go still around him. "Tomorrow your life will change forever." A chill swept through the barbershop. Not cold, just electric. Alive. Mark felt it climbing up his spine, tightening his throat. "What do you mean?" he whispered. The stranger gave a small, knowing smile, gentle yet impossibly wise. "Rest tonight," he said, "and don't fear what you think is the end. It is not an ending." He squeezed Mark's hands one last time. "It's the beginning." Then he leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper, one that felt too sacred for the room. "Those who serve the least among us serve the King of Kings." Mark's breath caught. His skin prickled. Before he could speak, the stranger stepped back, nodded as if sealing a promise, and walked toward the door. The bell chimed as he disappeared into the Texas night. And for the first time in a year, Mark felt the faint, impossible flicker of hope. That Friday night, San Antonio felt unusually quiet. Even the traffic along South Flores Street, normally loud and restless, moved with a strange gentleness, as if the whole city had exhaled. Inside his tiny apartment, Mark Rivera sat at a small kitchen table, staring into a bowl of soup he barely tasted. Every rational thought told him he should be panicking. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., the barbershop, the only inheritance he'd ever known, would be taken from him. He had no plan, no savings, no miracle tucked under his sleeve. And yet, panic never came. Instead, there was something unfamiliar sitting in his chest. Something he hadn't felt since childhood. Peace. Not loud, not triumphant. Just a quiet, steady warmth spreading through him like someone had placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You're not alone tonight." Mark leaned back, confused by the calm rising inside him. The stranger's words replayed over and over. "Tomorrow, your life will change forever. Do not fear what you think is the end. Those who serve the least serve the King of Kings." He shook his head. "Crazy," he muttered. "It's all crazy." But even as he tried to dismiss it, his heart kept circling back to the man's eyes, those deep brown eyes that looked ancient, knowing, almost too steady for someone living on the streets. He remembered the warmth in the stranger's palms, the authority in his voice when he spoke Mark's full name. He should have felt unsettled. Instead, he felt anchored. That night, Mark slept, really slept, for the first time in nearly a year. No nightmares, no anxious jolting awake, just a long, heavy rest. When he opened his eyes Saturday morning, something was different. The sunlight spilling through the blinds seemed warmer. The air felt lighter. Even his heartbeat seemed calmer, steadier. He brewed the last of his cheap coffee, sipping it slowly as he looked around his apartment, peeling paint, sagging couch, photos of Daniel and Sophie tucked in the corner. He felt no bitterness, only longing, and a strange confidence he didn't understand. By 6:20 a.m. he was dressed, keys in hand, and walking toward the shop. The cool morning wind brushed across his face, carrying hints of fresh bread from the bakery nearby and the faint aroma of early morning rain. Mark inhaled deeply, letting the stillness settle in his lungs. "Lord," he whispered, not even realizing he was praying again. If you're still there, thank you. Even if nothing changes today, thank you for last night. He reached the barber shop by 6:40 a.m. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the blue dawn painted the shop front in muted colors. He lifted the metal shutter, the metal clattering louder than usual in the quiet street. Inside, the shop looked exactly as he'd left it. Same chairs, same worn floor, same quiet stillness. But something in the air felt new, charged, purposeful. He couldn't name it. He couldn't explain it. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm. A moment of impossible calm before heaven moved. Mark turned on the lights, swept the floor again out of habit, lined up his tools and sat in his father's old chair. His heart was steady, his breathing even. For the first time in months, he felt ready, though he didn't know for what. And at 6:45 a.m., right on the dot, the bell above the door chimed. The storm had arrived. At 6:30 a.m., Rivera's barbershop glowed with the soft hum of its old lights. The sun still hadn't fully crested the rooftops outside, leaving the street bathed in a pale, bluish stillness. Mark sat quietly in his father's barber chair, waiting for customers he didn't expect, waiting for answers he couldn't name. Then, at 6:45, the bell over the door chimed, not with hesitation, not with the slow, nervous push of a regular walk-in, but with confidence. A man stepped inside wearing a charcoal gray suit, so sharp it seemed out of place in the aging shop. His shoes were polished like mirrors. His tie, a deep navy blue, sat perfectly centered. He held a leather briefcase in one hand, and an understated, expensive watch gleamed on his wrist. He looked like someone who had never once worried about rent in his life. For a moment, neither man spoke. Mark blinked, thrown off. Men who dressed like this didn't get haircuts at places like Rivera's. They got them at high-end salons downtown, the kind with marble floors and espresso machines. But the businessman smiled politely. "Good morning," he said. His voice was steady, professional, cultured. "Are you Mark Rivera?" Mark hesitated. "Yes, that's me. But I'm sorry, sir. We don't open officially until 7. The man waved a hand gently. "I'm not here for a haircut." He stepped deeper into the shop, eyes scanning the vintage chairs, the worn photographs on the wall, the framed black and white picture of Mark's grandfather holding scissors with pride. "This place has history," he said softly. Mark frowned. "What can I help you with then?" The man set his briefcase on the counter and extended his hand. "My name is James Harrington," he said. "I'm the owner of Harrington Properties." Mark froze. Harrington Properties was the company that bought the entire block last year, including the building his barbershop rented, including the landlord who demanded the $9,500 by tonight. James studied Mark's confused expression and offered a kind, almost sympathetic smile. "I'm here because someone recommended you to me," he said. "Someone I trust, more than almost anyone." Mark's pulse quickened. "Recommended me? Sir, I don't understand. I'm behind on rent. I might lose this place today." James nodded slowly, unfazed. "I know," he replied. "I'm aware of your situation, and I'm also aware of something else. Something that happened here last night." Mark's breath caught. "Last night?" "Yes," James said. "A man called me. Late in the evening, he told me you gave him the best service of his life, that you treated him with dignity when others wouldn't, that you have a gift money can't buy." Mark's heart pounded. The stranger, the interview, the prophecy, James continued. "He said I should meet you, that I should invest in you, that I should not, under any circumstance, let this barbershop die." Mark felt his knees weaken. "What exactly did he say about me?" James smiled, an enigmatic, almost reverent smile. "He said, 'This man has the hands of a servant and the heart of a king. Help him rise.'" The words echoed in the quiet shop. Servant, heart of a king. Mark swallowed hard. James opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder thick with documents, and laid it on the counter. "I want to buy the building," he said, "but not to evict you." Mark stared at him, stunned. "I want to offer you a full-time position, managing a premium barbershop brand I'm launching across Texas. Salary, benefits, insurance, and this shop, it stays under your name." The room felt unreal. Too good. Too impossible. James leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I don't know who that man was, But when he spoke about you, I listened. Mark's hands trembled, because he knew exactly who the man was, and he was already keeping his promise. The morning sunlight had finally broken through the blinds, filling Rivera's barbershop with a soft golden glow. But even that warm light couldn't soften the shock on Mark Rivera's face. James Harrington, the man who practically owned half the district, stood calmly beside the middle barber chair, flipping open a folder thick with papers. "This," he said, tapping the first page, "is a formal offer of employment. Full-time, $65,000 a year to start. Benefits, dental, vision, paid vacation. A salary worthy of your skill." Mark stared as though the numbers were written in a foreign language. I don't understand," he said, his voice barely steady. "Why me? You've never been here before." James nodded, as if he expected the question. "That's true. But the man who called me last night has." The room seemed to tighten around that sentence. Mark's heart jolted. The stranger, the haircut, the prophecy. "What exactly did he tell you?" Mark asked carefully. James folded his arms, thinking back. "At first I assumed he was someone influential, a consultant maybe. His voice had power, authority, the kind of tone that makes a man listen." He chuckled softly. "He didn't ask me to invest in stocks, real estate, or any business. He asked me to invest in a person." "A person?" Mark whispered. "You," James affirmed. "He described your shop, your history, your heart. He said you were a man who served with dignity, especially when it cost you something." Mark froze. The haircut last night, the expensive shampoo, the lost customers, the stranger crying in the chair. James continued. "He said your gift wasn't just cutting hair, it was restoring people. Hope, honor, identity." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly, as if replaying the call. And then he said something unusual right before the line cut out. Mark felt chills crawl up his arms. "What did he say?" James looked directly into his eyes. He said, "Tomorrow his life will change and you will be the instrument I use." The room fell completely silent. A truck rumbled by outside, but it sounded muffled, distant, like the world had stepped aside to let something sacred unfold. Mark swallowed. That's exactly what he told me last night." James blinked. "He spoke to you too?" Mark nodded slowly. "He came in for a haircut. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he needed help." James set the folder on the counter and stepped closer. "Mark, the man I spoke to didn't sound like someone homeless. He sounded like someone who carried the weight of the world. Someone old, wise. Someone whose presence makes you want to stand straighter." Mark's voice trembled. "That's how it felt here. In this room." James straightened his tie, took a breath, and pressed forward. "Look, I'm not a religious man. I don't pretend to understand divine things. But I know a moment when I'm supposed to act." Something about his voice, his certainty, told me this was bigger than business. He placed both hands on the counter, leaning in. "So here's what I'm offering. I buy this building, erase your debt entirely, renovate the shop, and make you the lead director of a new barbershop line we're launching across Texas. You keep your chair, your name, your legacy." Mark felt his vision blur. For a moment, he thought he might collapse. James smiled gently. "And all of this happened because of one man's recommendation," Mark whispered, more to himself than to James. "It wasn't a man." James raised an eyebrow. "Then who was he?" Mark exhaled shakily, tears welling. His voice came out fragile, reverent. "I think I served Jesus Christ last night." The moment James Harrington left the shop, a strange quiet settled over Rivera's barbershop. A quiet so thick it pressed against the skin. Mark stood motionless beside the middle chair, the same chair the homeless stranger had sat in just hours earlier, the same chair where the prophecy had been spoken, the same chair where something otherworldly had happened. But until this moment, Mark hadn't dared to look closely. His breath unsteady, he stepped toward the chair. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, landing directly on the spot where the stranger's back had rested. And there, etched into the faded red vinyl, were marks. Fresh marks. Not scratches from years of use. Not accidental scuffs. Imprints. Shaped like palms. Human palms. Pressed deep into the vinyl, as if someone had pushed against it with supernatural force. Mark slowly reached out, fingertips trembling. When he touched the indentations, His skin prickled with a warmth that didn't make sense, like touching something alive. At the center of each palm-shaped mark was a small puncture. Perfectly round. Perfectly placed. Perfectly impossible. His knees weakened. Nail wounds, he whispered. A chill moved across the room. Not cold, but electric. It felt like someone unseen was still standing there. He stumbled back, pressing a hand to his chest. Tears blurred the chair into a red and gold haze. He tried to steady his breathing, but nothing about this was normal. Nothing was logical. He turned toward the shelf where he kept towels, still shaking. That was when he saw it. A wooden comb. Not his. He stepped closer. It was carved from dark cedar, polished smooth, with intricate grooves swirling like flowing water. It looked handcrafted, beautiful, ancient, deliberate. Mark lifted it gently, almost afraid to touch it. The cedar scent rose instantly warm, clean, comforting, like the way church pews smelled in his childhood memories. On the handle, words were engraved with perfect, elegant precision. Whatever you do, for the least of these, you do for me. Matthew 25-40. His throat tightened. His vision wavered. Below the verse, in smaller handwriting, human, personal, unmistakably intentional, was a signature. With love, your brother and Lord. The room spun. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't kindness from a stranger. This was a revelation. Mark sank to his knees right there on the shop floor. The comb slipped into his lap as sobs poured out of him deep, shaking, unrestrained. Every fear, every failure, every sleepless night came crashing out of his chest. He had cut Jesus Christ's hair. He had washed his feet in the form of a stray man. He had served the King of Kings without knowing it. And Jesus had left a sign, not subtle, not symbolic, a literal message carved by divine hands. Mark pressed the comb to his forehead and wept into his palms. For the first time in his life, he understood what grace looked like when it walked through a door. And for the first time in years, he knew he wasn't forgotten. He wasn't abandoned. He wasn't invisible. He had been seen by the only one whose opinion mattered. And the miracle was just beginning. The weeks that followed were unlike anything South Flores Street had ever seen. Rivera's barbershop, once a dying business overshadowed by modern chains, became something entirely new, something alive. Renovations began almost immediately. Fresh paint, new lighting, restored flooring, updated equipment. But the heart of the shop, the vintage red chairs and the framed black and white photos of 3 generations of Rivera barbers, remained untouched. James Harrington insisted on that. Legacy matters, he'd said. But the biggest change wasn't the building. It was Mark. Every morning, he unlocked the shop with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. His hands, once heavy with fear, now held steady with purpose. Clients noticed instantly. His eyes were brighter. His posture, stronger. His laugh, real again. Word spread quickly. Customers returned. New ones arrived. People lined up before the sun rose, not just for haircuts, but for something deeper, something they couldn't name. And every Saturday from 8:10 a.m., the shop offered free haircuts to anyone who couldn't afford one. The homeless, the elderly, veterans, single fathers, young men trying to restart their lives. Mark named the program Grace Haircuts. No reservations, no questions, no judgment. Just dignity served from the same chair where Jesus Christ once sat. Those mornings became the soul of the barbershop. Tears mixed with laughter. Men who'd once been invisible were seen, honored, restored. Some found work days later. Others reconnected with their families. Many simply rediscovered what it felt like to be treated as human again. Mark never told them the full story of why he started the program. He didn't need to. The love behind it spoke for itself. But the greatest miracle unfolded quietly through 2 teenagers who used to call him Dad, Daniel and Sophie. With a stable income, a restored life, and hope alive again, Mark reached out one more time. He texted both kids, "I'm still here if you want to see me." For days, no reply. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, his phone buzzed. It was Sophie. "Can we come by after school?" Mark froze in the middle of sweeping hair. His hands shook. His eyes burned. He whispered a trembling, "Thank you," under his breath. They arrived 30 minutes later. Older, taller, wearing the weight of a year without their father. Sophie hugged him first. Daniel hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Mark, shoulders shaking. "We thought you didn't want us anymore," Daniel murmured. "I never stopped wanting you," Mark said, voice breaking. "I just didn't have anything to give." Sophie looked around the shop, wide-eyed. "This place looks amazing." Daniel pointed to the Grace haircut sign. "You're doing this for people?" Mark nodded. "Because someone did it for me." They didn't understand the meaning yet, but they felt the truth in his tone. That evening they went out for burgers, laughing, catching up, rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't instant, but it was real. And over the weeks that followed, the family that had fallen apart slowly knit back together thread by thread. A father once consumed by failure became a man led by purpose. A barber shop once destined to close became a sanctuary. A legacy once slipping away became a beacon of grace. All because, one night, a homeless stranger who wasn't a stranger at all walked through a fading shop door, and love, real, divine, impossible love, restored everything Mark had lost. Spring crept softly into San Antonio, brushing warmth across South Flores Street. Rivera's barbershop, once a quiet relic on the block, now glowed with steady life. Every morning the scent of cedar oil and fresh fades drifted out the door. Laughter mixed with clippers. Stories flowed as freely as conversation. But even with all the blessings, new business, restored family, emerging purpose, there was something inside Mark Rivera he couldn't shake. A longing, an unanswered question, a need to see him again. He searched the streets. He drove through underpasses. He asked around shelters. He wandered the same corners the stranger might frequent. Nothing. He found everyone except the one he hoped for. Until one quiet Tuesday morning, about 4 months after the miraculous encounter, something unexpected happened. Mark arrived early, as he always did. He unlocked the shop, flipped the lights on, and started brewing coffee. The familiar hum of life filled the room. Then, as he headed toward the back to restock towels, he saw something unusual wedged under the front door. An envelope, not dropped by the mailman, not delivered overnight, placed deliberately. His name was written on the front, in handwriting unlike any he'd seen. Elegant, ancient, almost glowing in the morning light. Mark froze. A chill, warm, not cold, slipped down his spine. Hands trembling, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of parchment-like paper. The ink was smooth, almost raised. As he read the words, his knees weakened. "Beloved Mark, I have called you by name." He stopped breathing. "I saw you in the darkest nights. I heard every cry that never left your lips. I was there when you swept empty floors, when your hands shook in loneliness, when your heart broke for your children." Tears blurred the letters. He wiped them, but they kept coming. "When you chose kindness over convenience, last October night, you did not serve a stranger. You served me." Mark lowered the letter, breath shattered. Jesus Christ. There was no other explanation. He lifted the paper again, heart pounding. "Do not waste time searching for me in places you think I dwell. I am in every face you honor, every man you wash clean, every broken soul you restore with your hands. Your barbershop is now a temple, a place where the forgotten will be remembered, the invisible will be seen, and the least of these will be lifted." Mark felt the weight, not heavy but holy. "Do not fear the days ahead. You are not alone. You walk with me, and every haircut given with love is a prayer I receive." The final words sank deep into his bones. Asterisk, asterisk. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. We will meet again. But for now, look for me, in the ordinary. With eternal love, your brother, and Lord." Asterisk, asterisk. Mark pressed the letter to his chest and sank into the barber chair, the same one where Christ himself once sat. Sobs, raw, reverent, unrestrained, poured from him. He felt small, seen, loved beyond words. When he finally lifted his head, the barbershop looked different. Not renovated, not remodeled, consecrated. Every chair felt like a pew, every mirror, a witness. Every haircut, a ministry. People began to notice it too. Men walked in and said they felt peace just stepping inside. Veterans cried without knowing why. A tired single mother said the air felt lighter. A teenager on the edge of giving up found hope in the chair. And every Saturday during Grace haircuts, the broken walked in, but stood taller on their way out. Rivera's barbershop had become a sanctuary. Not because of the new paint, not because of the business turnaround, because Jesus had walked its floor, left his marks, signed his blessing, and declared it holy ground. And Mark, once a man ready to lose everything, became the humble keeper of a sacred place. A temple built not of stone, but of scissors, compassion, and the love of Christ in disguise. Years passed, and South Flores Street transformed. The old blocks were repainted, new cafes opened, and the neighborhood slowly rose from the edges of poverty. But no building shined brighter than the one with a vintage red and gold sign, reading, Rivera's Barbershop, Est. 1955. Grace lives here. People came from all over Texas just to sit in the chair where Jesus Christ once sat. Word spread to Austin, Houston, Phoenix, Chicago, until stories about the miracle barbershop in San Antonio reached churches, radio stations, and even small-town newspapers. But the true legacy wasn't in the headlines. It was in the lives healed quietly inside those four walls. Veterans who battled trauma found peace under Mark's gentle hands. Men who'd given up on life regained dignity with one simple haircut. Runaway teens sat trembling in the chair and left with hope in their eyes. Recovering addicts came in every few weeks, not for style, but for prayer. And Mark never forgot the letter. He kept it framed on the wall near the old wooden comb, the one Jesus left behind. Nobody touched it unless they meant it. Some stood before it in silence. Others rested their hands on the glass and cried. Mark used to think the miracle was the building. Later he thought the miracle was his restored family. But as his life unfolded, he learned something deeper. The miracle was the people. The ones Christ kept sending, one by one. When Mark grew older, his son Daniel stepped into the role of lead barber, just as Mark had stepped into his father's shoes. Daniel carried the same tenderness, the same reverence for the stranger, the same sacred understanding that a haircut could be healing. He also carried the legacy of that October night. One day a young man entered the shop dirty, shaking, invisible to the world. Daniel welcomed him the same way his father had welcomed Jesus Christ himself. No judgment, no hesitation, just service. And as Daniel washed the young man's hair, he realized something profound. This legacy wasn't Mexican. It wasn't Texan. It wasn't just a Rivera legacy. It was American. A legacy of compassion, a legacy of dignity, a legacy of seeing Jesus in every broken soul. Pastors preached about it. Church groups traveled to witness it. Families told the story at dinner tables, how a humble barber in the U.S. served Christ without knowing, and Christ rewarded him not with wealth but with purpose. Even tourists from other states stopped by. Many left saying the same thing. I don't know why, but it feels like God is here. As Mark approached the end of his life, he wrote a final note to his children. Remember, Jesus doesn't always knock in glory. Some at times, he comes disguised in rags. Treat every person like he might be the one, and you will never miss a miracle. The Rivera legacy continued quiet, steady, unshakable. Barbers became mentors. Haircuts became prayers. A small shop in San Antonio became a lighthouse for souls. But the most important part of the story didn't stay inside one city. It spread across the nation, reminding Americans everywhere that God still walks among us. And maybe, just maybe, he has walked past you too. Maybe he sat next to you on the bus, or asked for change outside a grocery store, or stood on a street corner holding a sign you ignored, or walked into your life when you weren't paying attention. So here is the question the story leaves behind. If Jesus Christ himself came to you disguised as someone in need, would you recognize him, or would you walk away? Because sometimes the smallest act of love, a smile, a prayer, a meal, a haircut, can change not just someone else's life, but the entire direction of your own. If this story touched your heart today, if you believe miracles still happen in America, please subscribe to Stories of Grace. Join our family of believers. Help us share more true stories of hope, mercy, and modern-day miracles.